Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, and welcome to the Electoral Commission of South Australia's candidate briefing session for the current supplementary elections for the 10 councils. By way of introduction, my name is John Alderman. I'm the Manager of Elections. Here tonight to assist with the briefing, I have Olivia, Nick and Tamara. They'll be chipping in a little bit later on with various parts of this presentation, and also these are subject matter experts on various elements, so they'll be able to answer any questions as we go through it. Before we continue, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we are presenting from today, the Gunner land. I also acknowledge that we have people joining us from traditional lands across the state. Together we pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, as I sort of mentioned before, at the end of each section. To ask a question, you can either unmute your microphone by clicking on the icon or type your question by clicking in the speech bubble. We will then coordinate taking questions and appreciate your patience while we do so. Please remember this session also will be taped and made available on our website for those that are unavailable at this hour. Okay. Tonight that we'll be covering are the election timetable, candidate eligibility, how to nominate, campaign donation returns, responsibilities when campaigning, how the voting process works, and the scrutiny and counting process. This briefing does not cover what it's like to be a member of council. If you want to learn more about life as an elected council member, you can read the Local Government Association's Make a Difference Guide, which is also on the EXA and LGA website. First up, through this presentation, you'll see a page reference at the top right-hand corner where you can find more information in our candidate handbook. The candidate handbook is available on our website, and we recommend that you read it prior to submitting your nominations. I know that some people have already submitted nominations, and that's fantastic. But to ensure you've understood all the legislative requirements, we've got all sorts of information in that handbook. It's available on our website, so really encourage you to seek out that asset and have a read of that. Okay, now let's talk through the election timetable. The roll is to list the names of people who can nominate and vote, and that closed at 5 p.m. on Tuesday the 20th of December. Nominations opened on Friday the 13th of January and will close at 12 noon on Friday the 27th of January. The ballot draw will occur at 4 p.m. at EXA on the day of the close of nominations, and we'll be live streaming that. Voting packs will be sent out between Wednesday the 15th and Tuesday the 21st of February. The close of voting, which is the deadline for when voting packs must be returned to us in the mail, is 12 noon on Tuesday the 14th of March. The scrutiny and count will be conducted at EXA on Wednesday the 15th of March. However, I'm just letting you know this is subject to change. We'll talk through each of these important dates in more detail later in the presentation. Okay, so now look at, are you eligible? Let's move to the second topic. To run for council, you must be an Australian citizen, and at the time of the close of the rolls, you must also be an elector for the council area or a nominated person for a body corporate group, either of which has its name on the voters roll for the area. There's also a list of reasons that will make you ineligible to be a candidate. These reasons, which are provided on the screen, and they're also outlined in the candidate handbook on page 10. Okay, now let's move on to our next topic, which is how to lodge a nomination. First, we suggest, again, reading the candidate handbook and the profile and photograph requirements guide. These are again available on our website. You can then lodge your nomination through the candidate portal. A user guide is also available via the portal, which provides you all the tips and tricks you need to get through that. The first step in the portal is to choose the correct nomination option. If you're not sure which option for nomination that you fit in, please contact us for assistance. And at the end of the presentation, we've got a whole lot of contact details that you can use. As part of your nomination, you must lodge a candidate profile. This is a written statement about yourself. You can also submit a photograph that will be included with your profile. This is optional, but most candidates do provide a photo. Your candidate profile and photo will be printed on the profile sheet included in the voting packs, which are sent out to all the voters. They will also appear on the Excel website after nominations close. When completing your nomination, you can choose how you would like your name to be shown on the ballot paper, meaning you can use the name you are commonly known by if it's different to your enrolled name. Up on the screen, we have an example of how names appear on the ballot paper. Titles and honorifics are not permitted on the ballot paper. You might be a doctor or a justice of the peace, or have received an official honour such as an Order of Australia award, but only your name will be printed on the ballot paper. You may include this in the body of your candidate profile, however. Please be aware that your nomination may be rejected also if the name in which you nominate is either obscene, frivolous, or has been assumed for an ulterior purpose. Okay, let's talk about the requirements for the candidate profile. This statement is an opportunity to tell voters about yourself and why they should vote for you. Common examples of information candidates put in their profile include current or past work experience and qualifications, work or community interests, community involvement and membership in clubs and boards, personal information such as marital status, children, and so on. There may be also declarations of public policy and promises of public action. Your profile statement cannot be more than 1,000 characters. The portal will automatically calculate the number of characters for you. As part of the application, you may make statements and disclosures, including that you take responsibility for the content of your profile, whether you live in the area or ward in which you are nominating. Whether at the time of nominating or any time in the past 12 months, you are or were a member of a political party, and if so, the name of the party, and if you're no longer a member, the date you ceased being a member. Also, a single contact detail, which can be a street address, please note, not a post office box, an email address, or a phone number. These statements will be prompts for you to complete through the candidate portal. If your profile does not meet legislative requirements, X will take all reasonable steps to notify you of the matter for you to address it before the close of nominations. If that matter though has not been rectified by the close of nominations, your nomination will be rejected. Also, you might also note and be aware of that there's some restrictions on what you can include in your profile statement. Your profile must not comment on the decisions or actions that have been made or taken by the council, or on the decisions or actions of past or present of the council. It must be accurate and not misleading. It must not contain offensive or obscene material. It must not refer to another person who has nominated as a candidate for election to the council, either at the same election or any other election to be held on the same day, without the written consent of that person. If you are including a reference or quote, you may lodge written consents with your nomination and profile. If it is determined your profile has comment on council decisions or actions of past or present members of the council, it will be rejected. The word comment is taken to mean a criticism, value judgment, or endorsement of a decision about a council or council members. It does not, however, preclude statements of fact that are neutral, but is intended to exclude commentary that is either negative or positive endorsement. Now, some advice on what is and isn't acceptable is on the screen now. The left-hand side displays comments which are not accepted because the statement loses neutrality and becomes commentary. An acceptable version is on the right. It says mostly the same thing, but is neutral and without either negative criticism or positive endorsement. That often occurs when you attempt to include value judgments. So this is an example of how the publish profile appears. Capitals will not be included, or dot points, underlining, bolding, or entire words in capitals, other than acronyms. If you're submitting a photograph, it must be predominantly show the head and shoulders and have been taken within the last 12 months. Now, before I mentioned that it was not compulsory. If you choose not to have a photograph, well, this is how it's going to look. We'll have photograph not provided. Okay, we're sort of coming to the end of the section. I've just got a couple more slides before we have some questions. So, unfortunately, we often receive nominations that have not been completed properly, which then result in the nomination being rejected. It is therefore important that you lodge your nomination well before the deadline, so that if there are any issues, there's time to make corrections. We strongly recommend that you lodge your nomination at least 72 hours before that deadline. Ensure the contact details that you provide are correct, so that the electoral officers can contact you if we identify a problem. Ensure you are reachable after you lodge your nomination so that we can contact you. So you might need to pick up that phone if it's ringing and it hasn't got the number and you're not familiar with it. I will reiterate that if we find an issue, we'll make every effort to contact you to discuss the issue and offer the opportunity for you to make a correction. The candidate portal will be reset to allow you to return to your original nomination or profile and amend and then resubmit. So what happens once nominations close? Well, as soon as practical after 4 on nomination close date, a draw will occur to determine the order of the names on the ballot paper. Now, this draw will occur at exit and we'll live stream it. The Deputy Returning Officer, or the DRO, will publicly announce the names of candidates whose nominations have been accepted. Declare elected any candidates where there is an equal or lesser number of nominations as there were positions. If there are more nominations than vacant positions, conduct a draw to determine the order that the candidates will appear on the ballot paper. If you have been declared elected, the Deputy Returning Officer will telephone you and inform you through correspondence that and advise that you have been elected. So that's pretty well the end of section 1. It's the nominations section. I'm just going to hand over now to Nick, who's going to talk about campaign donation returns.
Thanks, John. My name is Nicholas Evans. I'm the Manager of Funding Disclosure and Registrations at Exeter. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about the campaign donation requirements of local government elections tonight. So there are certain financial disclosures that must be lodged with Exeter, regardless of whether or not you're elected. You can see on the screen there's a table that sets out a couple of the references to the returns that you might need to consider if you proceed with your candidacy. The first one is a campaign donation return. Now, this is a return where you must declare any gifts that are given to assist you in your campaigning. Now, even if you aren't given any gifts or you aren't given any gifts above the financial threshold that you can see on the table, which is $500, then you still must lodge a return, and you can lodge a nil return in those circumstances. There are 2 returns that need to be lodged, 2 of these campaign donation returns, and they're lodged at 2 separate periods. The first one is after the close of nominations, and the second one is after the conclusion of the election. And you can see on that table that the dates for the lodgement of those 2 campaign donation returns are set out. So you'll see that the first one is due between the 3rd and the 10th of February. The second one is due between the 5th and the 19th of April. Bear in mind also that we have both a date for lodgement of the return, and the return itself will cover a particular reporting period or a disclosure period. So this disclosure period that's covered by the return will vary depending on the type of candidate that you are. You might be a new candidate, or you might be someone who stood at the last general election for council, and that will create a different reporting period depending on the type of candidate that you are. There's guidance on how to calculate that on our website, but we would also encourage you to contact us if you've got any questions about the calculation of this disclosure period. And you can do that by contacting exa.returns@sa.gov.au, and please do that before you lodge the return itself. We can help you with that. There's a second type of return that you might need to consider. Now, this is a large gift return, and it's only required if you receive a gift with an amount or a value larger than $2,500. If you do not receive any gifts of that nature, you do not need to lodge this type of return. Now, bear in mind that this might also include multiple gifts from the same donor if, when you add them together, it takes you above that financial threshold. And this one needs to be lodged within 5 days of receiving a gift that hits that financial threshold. Now, there's a tab in the candidate portal which you're going to use for nominations, and you'll see that it's headed disclosure returns. And if you go to that tab, you can download any of the return forms you need to use for this purpose from that location, and you can also upload an electronic copy of the return once you've completed it. Pretty easy to use, and we would encourage everyone to use that form of lodgement for their returns. As I mentioned, if you've got any difficulties, just contact us at the email address I just gave, and you'll see that there's a copy of that email address also provided on our website. Now I'll hand over to Mara, who will take you through the campaigning requirements that you might need to consider.
Thanks, Nick. So this evening, I'm not going to provide any tips or advice on how to run an election campaign, but if you are after some ideas on how to connect with voters, the Local Government Association's Make a Difference guide does include a section on campaigning. What we are going to cover this evening are your responsibilities under the law regarding any electoral material you produce. So electoral material is defined as anything intended or likely to affect the result of an election. Electoral material can be printed or electronic. It might be an advertisement, a notice, a statement, a social media post, a flyer, a radio ad, just to give a few examples. Electoral material can only be published if it has the name and address of the person authorising its publication, and where it's printed, the name and address of the printer or other person responsible for its production. This is the one scenario under the Local Government Elections Act where the address may be a post office box or business address, provided it is the usual post office box or business address used by the person. In addition to making sure you authorise all your electoral material, you must also be aware that it is an offence under the legislation to publish material that is inaccurate and misleading, or to have published a letter to the editor of a newspaper without the name and address not being a post office box of the author of the letter. Candidates have been prosecuted and convicted for breaching the above legislation, both for failure to authorise and misleading material. So please make sure you understand and abide by it. Such breaches of the Act are criminal offences and carry fines of up to $5,000, and convictions can be recorded. Campaign signage that you may want to put up must also comply with these requirements. But if you intend to use signage, you do need to contact your council to find out where and when you can erect it and what materials can be used. So there have been some recent changes to publishing electoral material on the internet. So if it is published on the internet, which does include social media, and the name and address of the person authorising it is immediately accessible to the viewer, the name and address does not need to be included in the material itself. Also, if electoral material is published by someone other than the person who controls the site, the person who controls the site is not considered to have published the material. For example, if you make a post on your social media account and your name and address is accessible in the About section of the account, the post itself does not need to be authorised. If someone makes a comment on your post or page and that comment constitutes electoral material, you're not considered to have authorised or published that material. However, where you do publish electoral material which can be shared by itself, such as a picture or a video, you should authorise it. So when you stand as a candidate, you must campaign fairly and within the law. On the screen now, you'll see some examples of other illegal practices. These include bribery, intimidation, violence. A definition of bribery has now been introduced, which means it applies to any pecuniary sum or material advantage, including food, drink, entertainment, where the value of that food, drink, entertainment is $20 or more. A candidate or scrutineer is not permitted to assist a person to vote or obtain voting papers. It's an offence to disclose how another person has voted, dishonestly influencing or trying to influence the result of an election, exercising a vote to which you are not entitled, opening an envelope containing a vote, except for electoral officers during the scrutiny and count process. You are strongly advised to read the legal provisions relating to electoral material and illegal practices, which is forwarded to candidates after the close of nominations. Please also remember that not only are your campaigning materials and practices a personal reflection on you, but if they are deemed defamatory or misleading, it may also jeopardise the entire election. Recent changes to the legislation allows the Supreme Court to declare an election void if they are satisfied that such practices have affected the result of the election. If at any stage you wish to lodge a complaint relating to the election, head to our feedback and complaints page on our website. At EXA, we deal with two types of complaints. We have service complaints, which are about services provided by EXA or the operations of EXA, and electoral complaints, which are complaints that allege a breach or breaches of provisions of the Local Government Elections Act in this instance. Alternatively, you can provide your complaint in writing addressed to the returning officer. If your complaint relates to an opposing candidate's election material, make sure you include a copy of the alleged offending material, or if the notice is attached to a fixture, a photograph of the material, including any authorisation statement and details of the location. And that is it for me. So I will now hand over to Olivia to talk about the voting process.
Okay, we'll jump in and talk about the voting process. So following the close of nominations, if there are more candidates than required, voters will receive a voting pack in the post. Along with the ballot paper and ballot paper declaration envelope, the voting pack will include the candidate profile sheet, a postal voting guide, and a reply paid envelope for the vote to be returned in. For a vote to be counted, the voter must fill out the ballot paper, put it inside the declaration envelope, and seal it. The voter must then complete and sign the flap on the ballot paper envelope. The ballot paper envelope should be placed inside the reply paid envelope, which then can be sealed and put in the post. The envelope must be received by EXA by the close of voting. Now on the screen is an example of the graph that we will publish on our website. What we're uploading is a daily total of the percentage returned for each council. So you'll be able to follow along and see how many voters are returning their voting packs. When envelopes are returned, they undergo a preliminary scrutiny to check if the envelope can be accepted. Ballot paper envelopes will be rejected for a few reasons, and those are if the elector's declaration is not signed or it's signed by an unauthorised person, if the ballot papers are returned outside of the ballot paper envelope, if the ballot paper envelope declaration flap is missing, or if duplicate votes have been received. Voting material will be stored securely until the scrutiny and count. So the final phase in the election timeline is the scrutiny and count. At this stage, this is going to take place on Wednesday, the 15th of March. What will happen is first, the declaration flaps are removed from the accepted ballot paper envelopes. And this is what ensures the secrecy of the vote. Then the ballot paper envelopes are opened and the ballot papers are removed by electoral officers. This process can take several hours depending on how many envelopes are returned. Once all ballot papers are removed, they will then be checked for formality. For a ballot paper to be considered formal, the voter must have marked preferences for at least the number of vacancies to be filled. So for these supplementary elections, most vacancies are only one. So the voter must have marked at least the number 1 or a tick or a cross on the ballot paper. If there are 5 vacancies, voters must number at least 5 preferences, so from 1 to 5. The system used for counting the votes in local government elections is called proportional representation. This means that to be successful, a candidate must achieve a proportion of the formal votes, which is called the quota. First preferences are counted, then depending on whether a candidate has reached quota, further preferences may be distributed. It is important to remember that the candidate who received the most first preference votes may not always be elected. This occurs because another candidate may receive more votes throughout the distribution of preferences. This can occur in a preferential voting system. Now, the counting system is complex, so we recommend that you and your scrutineer read the relevant section of the candidate handbook. So it's up there, page 35. We also have further information available on our website and on YouTube. So let's briefly talk about the role of a scrutineer. So a scrutineer is appointed by a candidate to observe the scrutiny and count process and ensure that the process is fair and conducted in line with the law. It is a candidate's decision on whether they wish to appoint a scrutineer. Now, a question has come through about who can be present during vote counting. So you as a candidate cannot be present in the room. So if you would like to have eyes in there, eyes and ears, you will need to appoint a scrutineer. Remember that a scrutineer is not allowed to touch ballot material or influence or help an elector to vote. And keep in mind that any illegal practices that apply to you as a candidate also apply to your scrutineers as they are acting on your behalf. To appoint scrutineers, you'll be required to complete a scrutineer authority form, which the scrutineer must bring with them to the scrutiny and count and present to the Deputy Returning Officer on arrival. No more than 2 scrutineers per candidate are permitted in the scrutiny and count room at the same time. And I'll just clarify, you can only be present for the election that the candidate is contesting. So you can't go to another count or observe another scrutiny and count if you're not appointed as a scrutineer. So once the count is complete, a provisional declaration will be made and candidates will be contacted with the results. An unsuccessful candidate can request a recount within 72 hours of this provisional declaration. Any request must be made in writing to the returning officer with information supporting the request. The returning officer will then determine the validity of the request. If there are reasonable grounds for a recount, it will be carried out as soon as possible. Now, I've just had another question come through asking whether or not the scrutineer can be your spouse. Yes, that's fine. Just need to fill out the form. So we've got that uploaded on our website so you can have a look at the form. But yes, your spouse or family member can be your scrutineer. So I've covered very briefly the voting process, scrutiny and count and recounts and results.
Okay, that really is, I guess, the end of the formal presentation tonight, this evening or this afternoon. What I've got on screen now is a list of contact information. The contact information is there for take note of that one. I guess write it down. We're going to look to put elements of the presentation up for those that won't be able to make it. So we are taping it. Hopefully everything works out as we like. But these details will be made available on our website as well if you need to reach out and ask a question or contact us in any way. Okay, well, that's really wraps it up. So really thank you for your time this afternoon. Thanks, team, for coming along. Again, look forward to hearing from you later, and all the best if you do choose to nominate for these subs.